Welcome to Our Next Existence by Katie and the Chorus. I'm Katie, former technology strategist turned reluctant spiritual medium, and I channel messages from the Chorus, a group of beings just beyond our sensory perceptions who are loving, expansive, and who greatly enjoy sharing their perspective of us. Join us each week as we share and discuss their ideas about humanity's existence, purpose, and future. Concepts you can draw from to accelerate your path, expand your perceptions, and ultimately step into the flow of the universe and your life. Humans have 2 feet. Aren't you glad you tuned in? I mean, that's amazing. Things we say as we realize something. I've been realizing something recently that is perfectly reflected in our embodiment here of 2 feet. We commonly use a phrase when we're going through something hard that is, put one foot in front of the other. Just keep going, keep walking. And I always like that phrase because it makes sense. Keep going. You'll see it differently. But it wasn't until recently that I sort of focused in on the 1 foot in front of the other part of that famous phrase. The more something has more feet or more legs, the less I am comfortable with it. If you are one of those bright souls that likes bugs and arachnids and things like that, I strive to be where you are. I mean, a lot of legs, a lot of arms. I have a really hard time with it. Centipedes, they freak me out. But if, you dial it back and you get to like 4 legs, like lions and horses and giraffes, I'm like, okay, I'm okay with that. That's kind of majestic, right? I can understand that. But the closer you get to 2, the more I am completely comfortable and basically just think you're adorable. Like birds, 2 feet. Penguins are adorable. Dolphins, now you're going to say they don't have feet, but they kind of do. Those little tail fins, and they kind of like to stand up in the water and stand on them. And then they basically have the 2 little side fins that kind of look like 2 little arms. I'm completely comfortable with dolphins. But yeah, just 2 feet. We can't even use both of them at once for very long before we get tired. Hopping is hard. And I think perhaps this embodiment will take on a new meaning by the end of today's episode. In today's episode, we start with a little bit of a review of episodes 1 and 2 and the topics that the chorus had laid out and how those actually both pertain to their unfolding topic of time. And then we sort of move into the topic that they kick off today, which you will hear now. In the first part of the episode, you'll hear directly from the chorus themselves, and then afterwards we will discuss. Enjoy. There will be times, dear ones, when the world will seem slightly out of sync. Meaning, you will find that as you move through different beliefs of your colossal, magnificent belief system complex, that you will awaken to new understandings of those things and move forward in your life into broader and more expansive concepts. And then, at times, you may encounter evidence in your environment, in your earth plane, in which you continue to see evidence of those beliefs. In those instances, what do you think has happened? Have you not moved on in the way that you thought that you did? Are you manifesting something that you would rather not? Or are you seeing more and different parts of the game board? And as you see those parts from a new vantage point, are you not bringing to clarity more and more understandings of what you had believed and how that had functioned? And, in the same turn, are you not helping another and manifesting beautifully, perfectly, a different way of existing? Can they not see more clearly their own beliefs by the contrast to yours? You see, one of the more interesting beliefs that humanity has created as part of the constructs of limitation here is a belief in redundancy. This cyclical nature of your existence you know well, for we have spoken about it already. That your beliefs filter and mold the way in which you view manifestations, and those limitedly perceived manifestations construct beliefs. It was by way of this cycle that you continued to rebuff the perception of your own infinite natures. As you go forward and you encounter what you believe are reflections of beliefs, phases of your life that you had already come through, and see it continually reflected in others. Is it redundant? Is it those same beliefs that you thought that you had already transcended coming back to plague you? Or is this very, very different? There will be a part of you that senses the expansiveness of these experiences to come across another who believes as you once did, who understands the power of their ability to perceive you and your ability to perceive them. And, most likely, at times, there will be another part of you that will tell you that this is all the same. This is those same beliefs coming back. This is the same pattern of humanity. These are the same mistakes you once made before, and now you can do nothing to stop them. The choice is yours, beloved ones, as always, and you will find in the making of that choice that you discover anew your own infinite power. For your power is expanding, or rather, your perception of your own power is expanding. Meaning, up until now, you had been limited in how you could affect situations by what you could do on the five senses. You had to talk. You had to move things. You had to build things or write them down. You had to listen to something or look at things. And now you are expanding into more of what you are, and many of those things exist on wavelengths far beyond the five senses. And thus there is a new magic in your presence. There is a new power in your days, where simply by resonating, by existing, by being in front of these others who believe so differently than you, and yet not unlike what you once did, you radiate something new and something different. It may surprise you to find that you don't have to say a word. You don't have to help them. You don't have to tell them what they need to do to fix it. You do not have to cease their suffering. There is nothing there to push against. It is manifesting perfectly. And you will know this by your ability to perceive them and their ability to perceive you. The walls that once divided this game board into many different pieces, into many different silos, are crumbling. You will, and will continue to, see more of all of the other players of this game. You will recognize your similarities, and you will delight in your differences, for in both you will all rise to a greater clarity and a greater love. And we love you infinitely. You want to know something funny? When I first started channeling the chorus and we would connect, these sort of chills would move through my body. You know when you're getting sick and you have chills and it's like hot and cold and it sort of moves around? It's like sometimes it's like in your abdomen area or down your arms or in your legs. Feels like undulations, waves of something, hot and cold, but also like something else rippling through you. When I first connected to the chorus, it felt like that. And so, not surprisingly, I thought I was getting sick every time I channeled. I mentioned this in the book, and, I think I've mentioned it before in one other podcast episode, but nobody tells you that. Or maybe it's different. But the sensations when you start to channel can be really weird. And nobody tells you that it can feel like you're coming down with the flu. And I did get sick, of course, as I was channeling the chorus, especially in those first few years. And even as I was getting sick and feeling the chills as I connected to them, I wondered what that was doing. I wondered if me sensing the chills as I connected with them was actually causing me to believe that I was sick. It's like one of those deep psychological things. It's like the placebo effect. Like if you give your mind enough evidence to believe something, it starts to manifest it. And I wondered how to connect with them in a way that wouldn't give me chills. But it felt so completely out of my control. And just now I was sitting in my chair getting ready to channel this for this episode, and I connected with them, and they started sending over their love and their messages, and I got the chills. Only this time, I didn't think I was getting sick. It didn't feel weird. It felt known, and it felt comforting. Like the physical evidence of a connection that has been consistent and true and reliable for a very long time. Same stimulus, but my response to it is completely different. I think when I first had that question about what could I do differently that would help me to believe something different about feeling the chills, was the start of this manifestation. It was a grueling many years before I reached this point. But awakening doesn't often work in straight lines. It's all coming. It's all moving. It's all swirling around. And long before today, I did reach a point where I could channel without feeling sick, without feeling any strain at all. And today was the day I realized that. So you tell me, were all the times that I channeled in between before I reached this point redundant? You would say, no, probably not, because there was an improvement. But if the improvement is so faint, is so imperceptible, at what point between then and now would you say that I transitioned from chills of being sick in connecting to the chorus to chills of elation in connecting to the chorus? Was it 3 years ago? Was it 1 year ago? Was it 5 years ago? When does something stop being redundant and start being something new and different, when in many, many, many ways it looks and is experienced the same? The past 2 episodes, the chorus has started playing with linear time. As I think I've mentioned by now, the theme of this season and the next book is time and remembering. But as usual, the chorus does it in a very subtle, stealth kind of way. They're suggestive and they're loving. And so they never write things on a billboard and slap it down in front of us. They help us begin to feel something that is true, something that is a next frequency that we are about to resonate with. So if you notice, in the first week's episode, as we started to talk about acceleration and inconvenience, those 2 topics are really hinged, for a human, into the concept of linear time. Or, as the chorus would say, into the linear. Because as you continue to hang out with the chorus, what you will discover in their view about time is that the limiting aspects of time were our creation, but were really amplified by the idea of the linear in some ways. If we could experience time moving in all directions, that might be a little less limiting than time just going forwards and behind us. And if we could actually move into times ahead of and behind us, that would probably also be less limiting than an idea of a present moment to which we are constrained. Now, what's interesting about this is in modern times, and by modern times I mean, the past many tens of thousands of years, when you look at the entire human timeline, we have come across a concept called the present moment and being present, in which we sort of move into an awareness of what's happening right in front of us. This is in contrast to the idea of a present moment in time that is cut off from all other moments in time. So here I am in the present moment, and I cannot move into yesterday, and I cannot magically move into tomorrow. And at the same time, I have the concept of being present, in which if I take a deep breath, if I slow down my thinking, if I look around me in this moment, I feel something expansive. How do these 2 things relate? Or do they? So, as we talked about in the first episode of this season, inconvenience is a sense of being pulled off our path. As we mentioned in that episode, the idea, the concept, the mental framework of a path is required to have the experience of being pulled off of it. Mental projections, as we talked about in the first season, are our way of sort of limiting ourselves, of focusing our action into the achievement or the pursuit of something we believe that we need or want. And it's often all in our head. We do this so fast and so unconsciously that we often don't even know it's happening in the background all the time until you feel a sense, a friction that we call inconvenience. That sense is telling you that your expansive self is moving in a new direction, but you had a mental projection. You had a limitation, a way that it had to go, you believed, in order to achieve the things that you want. In a sense, you are awakening to your concept of a line, a linear aspect of your mental projection by way of the sensation of inconvenience. As an interruption bursts into your office first thing in the morning, even if you weren't consciously aware of all the ways you thought that day would go, you will become aware of the sense of that mental projection when you feel that this interruption that is calling you in a new direction is inconvenient. This relates to what the chorus was talking about at the beginning of that first episode when they said it's accelerating, meaning it's going to move faster than you have time, you could say, to name all of these beliefs that you are awakening to. Instead, you're going to start to feel it, and you're going to move through your days by recognizing, becoming conscious of all of this stuff through the feelings that you are having. This sense of inconvenience is one of the first of these accelerated sensations, meaning you're not going to potentially, in every instance, sit down and name all the ways that you thought your day would go and why you thought it would go that way and all the beliefs that you hold that caused you to believe it would go that way. It's going to be faster than that. You're going to feel the sense of inconvenience. You're going to awaken to the mental projection that you were holding, and then you're going to move on to the next thing. In a way, we are starting to break free of the lines. Our days will continue to expand as a reflection of this, meaning there will be even more turns. There will be even more surprises from a mind-based perspective. From an energetic perspective, we will feel a sort of comfort in chaos at times. We will feel a sort of knowingness through surprises at times. And as we talked about in the first episode, that will translate into sometimes something very inconvenient will come up and we'll actually be excited. And we may not be able to even explain why we are feeling so upbeat or uplifted or okay with things that might have previously caused us to feel a very different set of emotions. In last week's episode, they played with lines again. This time by bringing up the topic of sort of loose ends and the many horses. These visuals, these images that help a human to sort of feel their way into that sense of something being unresolved. Now, that again is our sense of friction, you could say. When a human feels that something is unresolved or not closed or not explained, we tend to attack it. That is, energize it. Now, as we are starting to move forward in an accelerated way, what will happen is more things are going to come up that won't be explained in the moment, that won't be potentially connected to our context in the moment. And we will feel both, as usual. We will feel very unsettled by this at times. We will feel unnerved that it's happening, and we will want to have it explained. And then other times, we'll feel like it's a beautiful opening. It's so exciting. And it's the start of an amazing story that we are awakening to. We talked about this in the human experience of failure, which, if you listen to the introduction to last week's episode, and through some of the analogies that we make through the rest of the episode, failure is a concept that humans experience that is often heavily dependent on linear time, meaning when you feel stuck in something that did not go the way you thought it would, you have a deep sense of failure. The loose end is so loose and you so don't know what to do with it that it can be excruciating at times. Whether the failure is your experience of a relationship or your experience of a project or an invention or a creative piece of art or music that just isn't getting finished in some way. This is very hard for a human because the friction is so great, meaning there is a part of you that feels an expansiveness of things that are possible, and then there is a part of you that looks at the failure and says, well, that's not it, and it's not here. Very similar to the experience of depression, which is a feeling of expansiveness of what's to come, and a looking at the five senses and not even being able to figure out how to get there. It is a strong sense of the gap and the distance that needs to be crossed, and a feeling of being lost and not knowing what to do about it. This is often why colossal failures will put humans into a deep depression. But now, as we talked about last week, as you begin to move outward from that moment, from that failure, the sense, the acuteness of the failure softens, meaning you move forward in another relationship. You move forward in creating a different piece of music. You move forward with that information to improve your business. As you expand beyond that moment, the sense of failure softens. And as many of us have discovered, it softens faster if you move adjacent to the failure. So if you double down on the failure itself and then try and fix exactly that failure, exactly that relationship or whatever it was that went wrong, it can actually sort of reinvigorate your sense of the failure. It is often when we are able to sort of just set it down, leave it be, and come back to it later, that we find that our perception of the failure has changed and that we have new ideas. Now, you could say that that's because you moved forward in a linear time, and that's true. But energetically, what has happened is that you switched horses. You moved to a different horse in your race of existence of life, and you move forward in a different category. So you cleaned your house, you went grocery shopping, you called an old friend, you accomplished something else, you took a nap, you switched horses. And by way of switching horses, you are shifting your perspective and energizing that instead of the failure itself. By the time you feel inspired to come back to the failure, energetically, you have moved. And though from the five senses perspective, we would say, well, that failure is still there, the chorus would say, but is it the same? The chorus would ask about your perspective and your beliefs, which are creating your experience of everything that you perceive. So by their definition, no, the failure is not the same because your perspective is now expanded. It's not like you rejected the earlier perspective. It's not like you jettisoned it out into space, out the space lock, and now you've moved on to something else. It's that all of your horses have continued to move forward in the interim, meaning all that ground that they've covered is still yours. All that learning that they have encompassed is still yours. And by switching horses, you have continued to evolve in your understanding of your own expansion. And as you come back to the failure, you can see it the way that you saw it the last time you looked at it. But there will be something else there too. There will be a new aspect of what you understand that is starting to come through and may reflect itself in a different attitude toward the failure, a different idea about what to do about the failure. So you're shifting from essentially a linear perspective of failure where this happened and then this happened and then this is how I fixed the failure, to a broader understanding of you and the being that you are and all the horses in your race, and how the understanding of each horse is contributing to all the other horses. We're starting to see this. A failure in your business may awaken you to something that you had been wanting to improve in your personal relationships. A failure with one of your kids, helping them to understand something, or a fight that you keep having with them, may help you to expand further in a creative project that you have. All of these things are interrelated. As psychologists and therapists are well aware, we very rarely have a thing that just plagues us in one area of our lives. It is usually present or demonstrated in how we approach many different things, whether it be family or friends or work or creations. And so the chorus is suggesting this too, but what they are suggesting is that it is your entire herd. Herd? Is that what horses? Yeah, group of horses. Your entire collection of horses is you, and all of these things are moving forward. And so when you switch horses, you are still moving yourself forward. It's just a broader perspective of you and who you are. And I would suggest that the more you relax, I guess you could say, into this understanding, the less you will feel like things are inconvenient. Because as something comes in and awakens you to a mental projection that you had and interrupts your day, you will understand that it's the whistle call of another horse. You won't feel like you're displaced. You will feel like, oh, we're switching. It will feel like it has more to do with you and your own expansiveness, your own power, than it does somebody else coming in and sort of putting something on you that you didn't otherwise want. And the real fun starts when you realize, when you become conscious of the fact that you can ride multiple horses at once. That kind of speed is nonlinear. That kind of speed is moving in many directions simultaneously. And that kind of speed sort of requires an expanded consciousness that is able to understand the movements of all of those different things at once. You could say that is a greater present moment presence. It is an expansion into understanding more of what's happening in the present by way of a broader consciousness that can see more directions, more of the things that are unfolding than we otherwise might have been able to from the five senses perspective, which typically is only able to focus on one thing at a time. This is perhaps one of our greatest experiences of a line. The idea that we work on this thing and then that thing. We are talking to this person and maybe that person and maybe that person. But if all three of those people talk at once, we can't take it all in. Multitasking is something that both appeals to us and also drives us a little nuts. Because as we multitask, we feel pulled out of, at times, a present moment presence. It feels like it's too much to focus on. It's too much to organize our thoughts around and respond to and evaluate. And this is true. It is possible to do many things at once, but it would be a different sense of doing. Rather than evaluating what could be done and what should be done and deciding a preference and then doing it, all of which takes time, instead, in a more energetic way, in a more expanded way, you would feel sort of the next response that comes to you and simply say it. It is a distant perspective. Rather than being down in the evaluation of the conversation and the words with 3 different friends, you sort of step back and see all 3 of them simultaneously and know the next thing to say in each conversation. And as the conversation unfolds, that knowingness expands as opposed to the remembrance or the scrutiny of the words that were said. This is, in a way, the beginning of a word that we have for this experience, which we call telepathy. Now, the idea of telepathy has been around for quite some time, and it is probably best known as mind-to-mind communication, meaning I have a thought, and then you have a thought, and then I, somehow in my brain, receive or know what it was that you were thinking. It's like having the conversation, but not on the wavelengths of sound, on the wavelengths of the mind. And so our minds are speaking, but we sort of skip the time that's required to bring those thoughts down into sound. So let's pretend that you and I are having a regular sound-based conversation, which is quite linear. I'm going to say a sound. Hi, I'm Katie. It's nice to meet you. And then you process my sound and think of an appropriate response. Now, there are only so many ways to respond appropriately according to our belief systems. You can say hi back, you can walk away, you can roll your eyes. In some ways, it may seem like there are a lot of responses, but as we've talked about in other episodes, it's not like you can just turn into a cloud of butterflies or sprout flowers coming out of your head or disappear into another dimension, right? There's only so many things you can do because you and I are here on the very specific wavelengths of the 5 senses. So already we are linear. We are in a line. The way that you listen and the way that I respond are very much taking turns, one at a time. If I started talking and kept talking, and you started talking and kept talking, that is not often what a human would consider an actual conversation. That would be 2 people talking over each other, as we often say. Now, what about what you're feeling as we're talking? Let's say that you're telling me about something really emotional that happened to you, a story, something that surprised you, maybe a bit of chaos, some aspect of awakening. Let's say that something happened to your home. Maybe it was a flood, maybe it was a fire. And you're telling me about how it happened this one day, you were out of the house, you came home, the whole basement was flooded, there was water everywhere, the sofa in the basement was floating. Okay, so you're telling me all of these things. Now, I might be creating images in my head that are reflecting your story. And if I am an empathetic kind of person, I might even be feeling some of the things that you're feeling. But at this juncture, I may not be feeling all of it in the same way that you did when you came home and saw your home underwater. There's still a little bit of a line in terms of one at a time where I am feeling my emotions, and maybe I could imagine some of the emotions that you're feeling, but you are also feeling your emotions. as you are speaking to me, but there's not really a way for you to share all the many things that you felt as you went through that emotion, as you went through that experience. We may often think that we are feeling what unfriend is feeling as we are in the midst of the conversation. However, if you stopped a human and said to them, "Do you feel everything that your friend felt when going through that experience?" Most humans will say, "Well, probably not. I'm sad for them, and I can imagine it would be hard to have your basement flood, but I don't think I felt it as much as the person who went through that experience themselves." And this would be true. But now let's kick it up a notch. Let's say that you and I had that conversation, but telepathically. So, in your mind, you say, "Hi, Katie." And somehow I'm like, "Oh, hey, whoa, somebody's saying hi," right? That's how we often think that it goes. It's the same exchange of words and of information, but potentially telepathically, potentially mind to mind. And this is not untrue, for this is a first step into telepathic communication, particularly for a five senses human that is accustomed to exchanging information in this one at a time kind of fashion. So now we would just be doing it without needing to say the words. And this is not an untrue starting point. However, if telepathy is more of an energetic communication, if more is happening on vaster frequencies as we are communicating with each other, what else might slip through in the conversation? Well, you could say all the emotions that you're expressing as you're describing, or your friend is describing, that their basement got flooded. And yes, this is true. More often, as you are energetically connecting to another being, you will feel more about what they are expressing, in addition to the description of the five senses manifestation of that instance. You see, humans tend to talk about five senses manifestations all the time. We talk about what we did, we talk about what we saw, we talk about what we thought. And if you've hung out with the chorus long enough, you know that they believe one of the first manifestations in our reality is a thought. So it would not be unusual for a human to believe that once they start communicating telepathically, they're going to continue to communicate about the stuff, about the five senses stuff, because that's what we talk about today. So really, the question about telepathy is not about completely how it works and how our emotions are exchanged. The question becomes, what would you talk about telepathically? If you're on vaster energetic wavelengths, if you see more of the universe and of creation, do you think that from that vantage point, you're still going to chat about very specific things in the five senses? Or might there be more to that conversation? In last week's episode, as I told the story about the beings that I connected to, I made a suggestion that my belief in futility was experienced differently on those wavelengths than it is when I am here in the five senses on these wavelengths. Here from the five senses, I acknowledge that if you had asked me, do I believe in futility, I might have agreed. And I might have said, yeah, sometimes things are futile and you need to just stop trying and go do something else. Find an alternate way of doing it. I acknowledge that I believe at times that certain actions might be futile. However, when I was communicating with those beings on vaster wavelengths, you might even say telepathic wavelengths, my perspective on futility was different. Totally aligned in who I was, totally comfortable in what I was saying, I expressed to them that I did not believe in futility. I saw it differently. The perspective that I held at that time might be not unlike what the Chorus was talking about today. That you can experience something that on the five senses looks the same, but energetically it might be perceived differently. Which means futility is completely based upon your perspective. Let's say that war has broken out somewhere on our planet. And everyone who analyzes it and everyone who's looking on it says, this is the same. This is the same conflict. Humans are fighting over stuff again. They're fighting over power or land or control. You might say from that perspective that this is futile. Humanity keeps messing up. We keep having the same arguments. We keep creating the same destruction. From the five senses perspective, this could be considered a very valid perspective. The futility is true and real. But now, let's say that you're energetically connected. Let's say that you are looking at this battle, looking at this war and the players involved, and yet something about it feels different. It feels like an opening. It feels like the start of something important. It feels shifted. It feels like different forces are at play. From this perspective, would what is happening feel futile? And you might say, well, no, Katie, it's not futile because it's not redundant. This is different. There's something about it that's different. And I might say, well, look at it. Look at all the five senses evidence. There's this, and that's happened before, and that's happened before, and that's happened before. And you could say to me, Katie, you're right. From the five senses perspective, it may in fact look futile, but from this energetic perspective that I'm holding, something about it feels different and full of possibility. From this perspective, it doesn't feel futile at all. And this was the chorus's point today. From the five senses perspective, you and I and many others may continue to come across evidence of beliefs that we thought we had moved through as a collective, as a civilization, and even as individuals. And yet we will see it continue to play out. And this is where they would say, but is it the same? Is it redundant? From a five senses perspective, there may be no case to be made for it not being redundant, for there's no other evidence on those wavelengths that is material, that matters to those belief systems that says otherwise. But from an energetic perspective, there is no such thing as redundant. All life, all creation is constantly expanding, is constantly moving and changing and growing. And so really, from the perspective of infinite creation, there is no redundancy unless you want to create the experience of it. And from this energetic perspective, what you are seeing is more of that perspective of infinite creation. So, allow me to say a thing. This war that you are perceiving, whatever war it is unlike any war that has ever been waged in the history of our entire civilization. Every aspect of it, every moment of it is completely new. Many things are being birthed into our reality by way of something that from the five senses perspective would not violate the rules of the game. Those of us who are energetically connected are feeling these things. We hold a hope. We hold an optimism for what might come of these events that might even be difficult to describe or justify. And that is because that perception is the start of an incredible, loving, and expansive reality that we are all constructing together. Those who are in the fray and who are maintaining the five senses experience of the game board, as well as those of us who are continuing to expand forward and chart the way. You might at times feel chills. You might at times feel strange sensations. And before you know it, you might be starting to hear the loving perspectives of many other beings who exist beyond this game. And there's so much they want to talk about. Thank you for your energetic presence here today. If you would like to find out more about the Chorus and I, check out our book, The Book of Human Awakening, or shop our new store, visit katieandthechorus.com. Thanks again. See you next time.